Hi everyone, Rethany Review Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a Redux review of the Kanye West album, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. The critically acclaimed 2010 album from one of hip-hop's most polarizing figures ever, Kanye West. I am now reviewing it for a second time for a few reasons. 1, my original review is easily my most infamous review. 2, covering it again has been a consistent request among my viewers, especially since I did a Redux review of the life of Pablo because the mix and the track list of the record had changed since my original review of it, which I thought vastly improved the album. There have been no such changes to this record though. 3, this YouTube channel recently hit 2 million subscribers, and in a weird way, I thought this would be a fun way to celebrate that. And finally, it's now been about 10 years since this LP originally came out. Over that span of time, I've come to hold quite a bit of respect for the place this album holds in Kanye's discography, a creative bounce back from one of the most tumultuous periods in his life, a major second wind to his career, and a gateway to the more manic and unpredictable side of his discography. It's for all these reasons that My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is worth revisiting now, and maybe even 10 years further down the road too. I guess we'll see. So Kanye West hails from the city of Chicago, but this record is not about his humble beginnings as a soul-chopping hometown hero or a Jay-Z protege. Instead, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is an extravagant depiction of the high-profile, high-drama celebrity lifestyle Kanye envisioned himself transitioning into after the loss of his mother, after the Taylor Swift interruption at the VMAs, after advancing to become one of hip-hop's most in-demand artists. And the concept of this album is spelled out in the title, in the album's opening lyrics. It's not a bland reality, it's a dark twisted fantasy. One Kanye has been dreaming of since his days in Chicago. One that is as imaginary as Nicki Minaj's fake storybook British accent on the intro. But of course there are elements of the album that dwell on the wealth and excess of Kanye's current day, and the way his ego and persona as well as love life ties into that. But still, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is more like a glimpse into a future that kind of came into fruition for Kanye, with him since marrying into the Kardashian clan, allowing his celebrity profile to grow larger in scope than his profile as a musician. From what of it we're exposed to in the media, Kanye's current day is definitely dark, and arguably beautiful as well. But the fantasy he imagined here on this record pales in comparison to the life we have seen as the audience play out in the headlines of the past several years, of the lyrics of Ye or The Life of Pablo. I was sort of bored by its portrayal in my original review, and it seems like even less of a big deal now that Ye's life has wound up in a place even his wildest imagination here only began to scratch the surface of. But I guess this record isn't just about the narrative or the concept of fame behind it. It's also about the features, the rapping, the instrumentals. It's the total package. Or at least that's the reputation this album has grown to have. And of course I was interested to see how those elements aged to my ears over the past decade or so. Still to this day, I would say that Dark Fantasy ranks as one of the best openers to any hip-hop record this decade, with its grand and glamorous and stunning piano chords, with its flawlessly arranged chorus of vocals from Justin Vernon and Tiana Taylor. It's an odd but angelic sound. Can we get much higher? Is just like a beautiful moment on the record that I think also expresses the theme and the idea of the concept here, in that we've reached another echelon, a new height of popularity, of fame, of bliss, of euphoria, of extravagance. The beat on this track, once it drops, is absolutely mad. The jangly chimes, the steady kicks and snares, the dusty, wheezing two-note interval melody that sounds like, I don't know, an old Mellotron or something. The way the instrumental thickens up on the second verse, though, the bridge, which is quite ominous too, is great. It's one decadent epic passage after another, and some of my favorite Kanye bars end up on this track too. From the classic aside of, "You ain't got no fucking Yeezy and Serato," to more revealing lines that I think get to the heart of Kanye's personality, like, "Me found bravery in my bravado." There's also excellent strings here, like, "The plan was to drink until the pain over, but what's worse, the pain or the hangover? Fresh air rolling down the window, too many Urkels on your team, that's why your win's low." I loved that the first time I heard it. I still love it now. However, like any great Ye track, there is going to be a stinker or two, and I think he does meet that quota. Sleepy Hollow, which is known for being the home of the Headless Horseman, No Head. Maybe one could interpret this as Kanye saying something about having lost his mind, but Kanye oral sex bars tend to not work in that many layers anyway. Whatever few lyrical duds there are on this track, though, it's easily made up for by how amazing the instrumental is, by the cold and confident flow that Kanye delivers all of this with. He sounds like he's in a place where he doesn't have to do too much to prove himself. The following Gorgeous, though, is a track that, to this day, I'm still kind of torn on. Without a doubt, it is a special point on the record, thanks mostly to its hefty helping of vocal distortion and Kid Cudi's ghostly, haunting chorus on the cut. And part of me likes how stark and minimal and bare the entire track is, but the faint instrumental over the song's 6-minute runtime just does not do enough for me. The drums, the guitar, the very quiet chords in the background, it's all just a little too faint. It doesn't make for that strong of a sonic foundation. However, Kanye does drop 3 monstrous verses loaded with quotables and food for thought, where he's boldly touching down on things like paranoia and racial discrimination. The first section of the first verse on this thing is easily one of the most impressive displays of lyricism across Kanye's entire discography. Penitentiary chances, the devil dances, obviously a commentary on the likelihood and statistics that people of color face in terms of landing in prison, and eventually Answer to the Call of Autumn, things being in decline, linking into that by saying, "All them fallen, autumn, fall, for the love of ballin'," that fast, money-making, quick, and illegal lifestyle driving people into a position where they have 30 rocks in their pocket, and the cop arresting them looks like Alec Baldwin, basically displaying that racial divide there between those being arrested in and those initiating the drug war. So not only is all of this deeply poetic and clever, but it feels so weird listening back to this because current day Kanye seems so far removed from making any of these kinds of greater connections between oppression, inequity, racial disparities in the justice system. It was even kind of funny going back listening to his initial lyrics on So Appalled, where he says, "I'm so appalled, Spalding Ball, balding Donald Trump, taking dollars from y'all." Not only making fun of Donald Trump's stupid hairstyle, but acknowledging that the man's a fucking scammer. People will often say, "Hey, what happened to the Kanye that said George Bush doesn't care about black people?" When honestly, this is the Kanye I want to know where he is. Where is this Kanye right now? Because this is easily one of the most damning commentaries on the black community and the American government's treatment of it on almost any modern rap record. Lyrically, the rest of Gorgeous just gets better from here, in my opinion, although it kind of starts to wear out its welcome once we get to the Raekwon feature, even though there is a bit of an instrumental change-up at this point in the track. Lyrically, I don't think Raekwon does enough, even though he's, a goddamn legend, to reinforce all the lyrical themes that Kanye has been working with up until this point in the song. At the time when I first reviewed it, Power was maybe my favorite track from the record, one of the best songs of 2010, and I still pretty much feel that way now. In fact, I think there were a lot of ideas here that have only gotten better with age. The iconic vocal chants at the start, the amazing King Crimson sample, the chunky boom bap drums, the whole thing sounds larger than life. And Ye's lyrics ingeniously depict him on a power trip of sorts. He sounds like a power-hungry madman on this track. I also love some of the predictive bars on this track too, where he is rapping about grown-up thoughts intruding on his childlike honesty and wanting to have a custody battle to fight for that. Are the SNL bars on this track kind of petty? Sure. And do I wish the words Colin Powell's Austin Powers never came out of his mouth? Yes. no matter how generously you try to interpret that. Still, I'll take it with a side of cello. Thank you. So one of my favorites on the album here contrasts in the track list with one of my least favorites, and that is All of the Lights. More than ever, I think the track sounds like a tone-deaf comedy of errors. For one, the mastering on this song is awful. It sounds compressed to death. Why are the drums this blown out? I like the little horn line on this track. That's great. And I love Rihanna's slick hook on the song too. But it's not enough to make up for Kanye's preposterous performance and lyrics on this track, from slovenly singing to the terrible word association in the pre-chorus. Cop lights, flash lights, street lights, Bud Light. And I can't help but feel as if the lyrics in the verses here trivialize the domestic abuse scandals that we often see come from celebrity circles and are highly publicized in the media. The lyrics are less about the abuse and more about bad things happening to the protagonist being inconvenienced or made to go through some sort of struggle as a result of their very bad decisions, which to me sounds okay. Bad things should happen to domestic abusers. However, that is not the tone of the track. Being generous, we could say the true meaning of this song is that having your life in the limelight often exposes your lowest points, your most embarrassing points, your worst decisions to the widest amount of people. But there's maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 dozen different ways that one could portray that idea without minimizing the suffering and the experiences of abuse victims. So even though I appreciate maybe there's a lot going on in this song conceptually and instrumentally, to my ears, it's a horrid mess. And a little bit misguided too. We then get the Star-Studded Monster, a track that is known for its long run of features from Rick Ross to Jay-Z to Nicki Minaj to Bon Iver. And there are a lot of things I like about it. I like its freakish attitude. I like its dark energy. I like its sinister vocal intro, the war drums and the beat. Also some of the wilder asides from Kanye in his verse. Put the pussy in the sarcophagus. Put the pussy in the sarcophagus. Okay, just do it. The hook is super slick, and the point of this track isn't too far off from what Kanye was also trying to communicate on Power, how his life, his ego, his persona, his fame has transformed him into something bigger, but also kind of maniacal, something beyond just his simple human form. But listening to it more times, more years down the road, what's not sitting too well with me are the features. I do like how Rick Ross's husky voice sounds on the beat here. It's a good intro, but vocally I think Jay kind of undershoots it. His lyricism is on point though. I love the bar where he says he sees dudes he's made millionaires milling about, spilling their feelings in the air. That was a really smart point. But Nicki, by comparison, I think vastly overshoots it with all the inflection switch ups and the baby voice and the it's oh God, it's too much. And sadly, she doesn't have the lyricism to make up for just overdoing it. In that Tonka, the color of Willy Wonka? No. So Appalled was a track originally when I reviewed this record, was a front runner for me, one of the best, but I don't so much feel that way these days. The odd and lengthy Swizz Beatz refrain on this track is still an earworm for me. Life can be sometimes ridiculous. I still love the track's fuzzy, apocalyptic instrumentation. It is sinister as hell. But Kanye's putting Jay-Z features on here like they're going out of style. And the track really could have ended right before the Sci-Hi feature. It really could have finished there, not only because it's the weakest verse on the song. Ha, I'm so outrageous. I wear my pride on my sleeve like a bracelet. If God had an iPod, I'd be on his playlist. My phrases amazes the faces in places. Everything past 440 on this track just feels like an unnecessary extension. Even the RZA appearance, I'm sad to say, as much as I love RZA, as much as I love Wu-Tang, it just doesn't add that much to the track. I mean, if you really wanted it to be here, then, I don't know, swap out one of the Swizz portions and then just tighten the track up, and it's so much better. And Pusha T, even though I like his feature on this track, it sort of illustrates a general lack of thematic cohesion between every single verse on the song. sadly. I will say that Devil in a New Dress still sounds great after all these years, though. Not just because of the clever lyricism, of the smart rhyme patterns, but also the track feels like a very cool update on classic Kanye with its chopped up soul samples, with its sparse drums, with its gleaming strings. On this track, Kanye feels less like he's rapping and more like he's preaching or passionately ranting at some points, and just going on and on and on about temptation and lust and desire. I love the buzzing Mike Dean guitar solo on this track too. I don't think over the years he's gotten quite enough credit for being the musical technician he is for some of the greatest moments on this record. The Rick Ross feature at the very end, while not mind-blowing, is an appropriate placement, considering the lyrical themes here and the large, glamorous instrumentation. We then get Runaway, which many people consider to be Kanye's best song, the centerpiece of this album. And I certainly get why. The instrumental, for one, is great. That depressing, minimal piano line, the vaguely industrial and frigid drums and atmosphere, which all contrasts very well with the light and airy and elegant strings and synths placed throughout the track. The Pusha T feature is a nice touch too. But there is so much about this track that I still do not care for. For sure, I like the idea behind the song, tragically finding yourself in a place where you can't love, you're a broken person, and you're telling this person who you care for to run away from you because you are busted. You can't keep a relationship together. It is very much a toast to the douchebags. It is heart-wrenching in that respect. There are also some moments on this track where Kanye vocally is pretty decent, like on the hook, or that little passage just before the Pusha T feature. But generally, the lyrics and the singing on this track, come on. She found pictures in my email. I sent this bitch a picture of my dick. It's embarrassing that he did it. It's embarrassing that he wrote it. It's embarrassing the way he sang it. I'm embarrassed that I'm talking about it. The verses on this thing are not cute. They're not endearing, they're not relatable. I would say they're kind of cringe. Also, the thin, horrid, distorted vocal solo that is manipulated, auto-tuned, vocoded, I'm not sure, at the very end of this thing, really wears out its welcome very fast. It does not need to be that long. It is not interesting for even half the time that it goes. If it was a guitar that was generating this sound, I would just say it sounds awful, but because it's a voice, I'm supposed to, wow, freak out. Hell of a Life was one of my least favorite Kanye tracks ever when this thing came out, and that is still true to this day. Not only is the Black Sabbath Iron Man interpolation on this track terrible, but it sounds absolutely silly over these goofy Casio demo drums and farty-ass bass lines. Between this and the super speedy arpeggios that pop up in the beat here and there, the instrumental's a mess. What's worse is Kanye's probably very real sex addiction legitimizes anything he thinks or could say about sex on the song, so he doesn't really edit himself when he thinks about writing about nuns coming. Which I guess is cool if you're like an edgy death metal band or something, but and look, I'm not a prude when it comes to sex in music, but for a track about sex and one's need for it, it's not a sexy song, nor is it all that extreme either. Like, cross the line, the craziest shit you say in this track is anal and gangbangs, and that's it. That's pretty vanilla. Your wild sex fantasy is just basically every college-age straight dude's porn search history. So Kanye's twisted fantasy then tumbles even further down the rabbit hole of sex and love on the track Blame Game, where John Legend's boyish voice, as angelic as it is, does sound a little silly, saying stuff like, I'll call you bitch for short, you call me motherfucker belong. I do love the gently marching snares on this track though, the string melodies as well as the super sad piano passage lifted from an Aphex Twin track, but the cherry on top are Kanye's vocals, his rhymes, which depict manically these different pitched and distorted and panned vocals that are arguing their way through this whole situation, this scenario where a love is on the rocks, it's deteriorating. It's pretty tragic in the way that it plays out, and the way that Kanye portrays it is very creative. Now, stopping here, this is a song I could say that I love, despite the handful of little elements that I think about it are just okay. But that's only something I could say if not for the Chris Rock sketch at the end of this track. It is obnoxious. It beats the joke to death. And look, there are some lines of it that I think are funny, despite the woman on the other end of the line sounding like some kind of weird, obedient sex robot. But ultimately, the issue with the skit is that the tone of it totally upends the sad and dreary vibe of the song to come before it. Plus, it's a very odd transition into the record's very ornate auto-tuned finale, Lost in the World. I've always disliked the way the vocals are arranged on this track. I would say the vocal layering on this track is almost like the complete opposite to how grand and amazing the vocal layering is on Dark Fantasy with Justin Vernon and Tiana Taylor. Then there's the super cheap and silly, ridiculous verse that Kanye lays into this track that just has all these just very nonsensical opposites going on. You're my lie, you're my truth, you're my hot, you're my cold. For as big and as loud and as harmonious as it's trying to be, it just feels like a whole lot about nothing. And the very end of the record gets even more confusing as Kanye delivers this edited version of Gil Scott-Heron's Comment Number 1 piece. So we have one of the most radical voices in music ever talking some of his most radical shit ever, but it doesn't really link into much of anything the album has been about up until this point. I mean, maybe some of the verses on Gorgeous, but like, that's it. Some have tried to say that this piece and Kanye's inclusion of it is like a commentary on where his life is going from here and the outlook is grim. But for me, that very much feels like a stretch. So honestly, throwing this poetry piece into the end of the record, in my opinion, sounds like trying to force something super meaningful into the finish of this album to give the audience the sense that they've heard something that's way more substantive than it actually is. So nearly 10 years after my review and the release of this album, and I still think that it starts strong, it finishes super weak. The concept at best is spotty, and that is partially made up for with solid features, extravagant, amazing, high-quality instrumentals. But overall, in my opinion, to put this album in a word, overrated. I am feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video for you to check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Kanye West, my beautiful dark twisted fantasy, forever.